Okay, we are officially live. Welcome to everyone logging on. We're so excited to have you here. I'm going to give everyone just a minute or two to hop on so that we don't jump in without missing too many folks. Awesome. I see some familiar names on our attendee list. So glad to have you all joining us. We're going to have such a fun time talking today. Cool. All right, everyone. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Welcome to Turn Data into Dollars. I am so excited for us to bring you all this webinar. It's a topic that I think all of us here as panelists are anxious to discuss with you and talk more about. So just to let you know who I have here with me today, first of all, I'm Hannah Barnes. I'm the marketing manager at Planning Pod, and I'm your host, which I love saying every time. I'll be moderating this discussion between our expert panelists. And to introduce them to you, our first panelist here is Stephen Feingertz. He is the founder and CEO here at Planning Pod. Steve spearheads our company's strategic vision and oversees our innovative software solutions. With over 15 years of expertise spanning marketing, design, software engineering, and business management, he brings a multifaceted approach to product development and service delivery. Steve's leadership ensures Planning Pod remains at the forefront of event management and planning software, catering to diverse client needs with cutting-edge technology. His commitment to excellence drives our company's success, cementing his reputation as a pioneering force in the industry. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you very much. Appreciate
it. Steve, this is all of you attending here. It's really special. Steve doesn't often get on here and do public-facing stuff with us. He's often our man behind the curtain. So you count yourself lucky to be here talking with him. He's got some great insight to share. And our second panelist here is Jonathan Aymin. Jonathan is the founder and CEO of Common Sense Events, and he's also founder of Weeva. Jonathan embarked on his journey into the venue industry with the launch of a single San Diego wedding venue. His path led him to expand his ventures to encompass multiple venues in multiple states through his venue management company, Common Sense Events, all while trailblazing the Venue RX podcast, of which he is the host, and the YouTube channel to ignite inspiration with the wedding and events community. In addition, Jonathan serves as the visionary founder behind Weeva, the first national wedding and event venue association. This esteemed professional association is dedicated to venue owners and operators, offering unrivaled networking opportunities, valuable resources, and comprehensive education tailored to the venue industry. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thanks so much for having me here. And Steve, it's great to be on. I know, having two people who are kind of really who own the business Planning Pod, it's rare to free up time in your schedule. So I appreciate being able to have this chat with you.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, without further ado, let's dive into this topic. What we're talking about here is how to not only track the data that you need to gather insights to help you drive your business forward, but we're also talking about how to interpret that data, how to apply it to your business. And both of these people I have here with me have a lot of amazing insight to share. So the first thing that I would like for us to talk about is identifying the metrics that drive growth. In other words, determining your most important key performance indicators or KPIs and streamlining your reporting. So in terms of identifying metrics for a variety of businesses, Steve, I'd love your take on this. What do you recommend for a business trying to determine what they should watch in their data to figure out where they need to be more successful?
Yeah, absolutely. Every business is different and every business has different goals. And so identifying the performance metrics that work for you, start with kind of a 30,000-foot overview of your own business. And this is something that everybody can think about as context for the discussion that we'll have through the rest of the webinar. Before you can identify your KPIs, your metrics, you really want to sit down and evaluate your business, so you can identify the actual goals, the actual things you want to track. And so what we do, what I think a lot of people do, is start with a SWOT analysis, which is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And if you sit down and you evaluate your own business and you say, what are we good at? What are we not so good at? Where do we see opportunity for growth? And where do we see competitive threats? It starts to build out a roadmap of your own unique business, and you can start to identify paths and goals that you want to actually measure and work towards. So I would say everybody should kind of be thinking about that, as we talk about all these KPIs and these metrics and move from there.
Yeah, I think it's really tempting. Like as humans, we really love the idea of kind of a one size fits all approach to things, right? Like, give me some type of template. This is going to tell me what I should look at in my data. But the best thing you can do for yourself is really hone in on your individual goals in your business in order to get some clarity and stay directional. And Jonathan, that reminds me of some of the content we were talking about in our live stream the other night. I'd love for you to weigh on this too.
Yeah, I'd love to take what you said, Steve, because that's 100% accurate. You have to contextualize it to your specific scenario. And I think that's why it's really cool that you guys are doing this webinar, because it's going to allow people to ask maybe some specific questions. And folks who are live, like, please ask selfish questions for your business, because we want to make sure that, we're able to provide that value. But Steve, I'm going to kind of take what you said and make it more specific for people, and just kind of mention some of the things that we specifically track. We, like you said, you want to evaluate, what type of business do you want to run, and what type of business you can run also. Because if you are, and I'm speaking from a venue perspective, but obviously, anyone else, whether you're a planner or whoever else is using the platform, you're going to just look at where you are at in the market, and if you're in upstate New York, or if you're in Connecticut versus if you're in Florida, East Coast, California, if you're in the Arizona area, Nevada, right? Like, these are just going to be radically different markets. Texas, obviously, radically different markets with seasonality that you're going to have to consider. And so, and your venue, right? And the type of business that you can run with personal things you've got going on. So, like Steve said, look at what your goals are. And I would say, though, in terms of kind of some very specific things, we want to be tracking the revenue, right? We want to be tracking revenue per event. We want to be tracking some kind of very specific things that will help inform the big picture. Because if you say, hey, I want to make $1 million, in gross sales a year, and your average cost of an event is $5,000, it's going to look very different than if your average cost of an event is $10,000 or $15,000, right? You're going to have to do less events. Or if you say, hey, I only want to do 20 events a year and I still want to reach that $500,000 or $1 million mark, it's going to radically adjust the cost per event that you're going to need. And you're going to also have to think, does your area support events, and does your venue support, or your business support those type of events that are going to actually generate that revenue? So I would say looking at revenue per event is going to be really important, or even projected revenue for the event. And then how much does it cost you to actually bring in new clients? So your acquisition cost. And I want to actually put something in here really quick. I think for the wedding and event industry, we are a bit behind maybe marketing and advertising and marketing industry, because KPIs and all the metrics and things like Net Promoter Score and some of those different things are very commonplace in those industries. And so if you're ever a little bit like, man, what data do I need to be tracking? It's a good lookalike. It's not going to be exactly the same, but if you look at metrics and data that marketing companies are tracking, that can really kind of help get you introduced to the really businessy side of what you're doing, and not just kind of the emotional and sales driven and kind of passion side that I know we all have as event pros. So yeah, to not go on forever, because I could talk about this forever, I would say, how much does it cost you to get a client, right? How much are you spending in ads? If you're doing Google ads, what's your cost per conversion, right? You don't just want to know clicks. You don't just want to know some of these kind of impressions or higher level things. You want to know how much does it cost to acquire a conversation with someone, and whether that's coming from online platforms or wherever. So client acquisition cost, I would say, are good. The booking rate, obviously, like how many events can you book per month? And there might be key constraints there. You might be out of town for 2 weeks out of every month, or,
Right.
whatever else. Again, to go back to Steve, what you said, the style of business you want to run. So booking rate, I said revenue per weight, client acquisition cost, and then your basically, we like to look at it in terms of inventory. So, I would really, especially if you're starting out, but even if you're not starting out, look at your year, look at your calendar year, and try to figure out what is your inventory. What is 100% booked for you look like? And if that's 100 events a year or 50 events per year, do your calculations based on that. And so that will really drill down into your utilization. Like how much are you, and this is kind of like a hotel industry, right? Are you, 20% occupied, 80% occupied? And then, yeah, the other thing that you could track very specific is the satisfaction, your client satisfaction. Are you getting reviews on Google, Yelp, any of the online directories? So yeah, I would say those in order: booking rate, client acquisition cost, your customer satisfaction score, the revenue that you're receiving per event, and then how many available dates are you utilizing, is going to be those key things that I would be tracking.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And I love the parallel that you're drawing to how marketing companies, I'm selfishly going to talk about this for a second because I'm a marketer, but I love how you're pointing to that as kind of a guide for how to determine return on a lot of your efforts. And Steve actually happens to have an extensive background in marketing agencies. So Steve, I'm curious if you might be willing to expand on some of those practices and things like Net Promoter Score, which some of the folks here might not be familiar with.
Yeah, I was going to jump in on that. When you're looking at KPIs, you can look at objective metrics, data. So things like revenue, what's my return on investment? What is my payroll cost? Am I profitable, et cetera. There's also these subjective KPIs that you can measure, which Jonathan touched on. Things like attendee satisfaction, sponsorship satisfaction. Are you getting those Google reviews? And there's a little bit of a hidden KPI in there too that I think people should pay attention to, and that is your efficiency as a business owner, your opportunity cost. Are you working in your business or on your business? And I know that varies a lot, depending on the size of your business, but that's something that a lot of people don't pay attention to is what's your time worth? Should you spend an hour writing an email or should you spend an hour selling? Those kinds of things. And so I think kind of balancing those three topics, the objective revenue, purely data-driven side that can be analyzed, and then the more subjective stuff, do people like what I'm doing and am I wasting my own time? They can all be measured.
Yeah, they definitely can all be measured. I know something, Jonathan, you and I touched on when we did a live stream the other night was how can people approach the wealth of data at their fingertips these days in their business without overwhelm? And how can they use those numbers to remain directional, to remain working on the business rather than in the business? And I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about that because you had some great insights.
Yeah, you really have to recognize, and this has been an adjustment for me over the years that I've been in business. You really have two hats that you're simultaneously wearing. You're wearing the CEO hat, which is a very active role. You're making decisions in the business, there's strategy involved there, but then you're also a business owner. And when it comes to venues, we like to think about it as like asset management. To go to the kind of real estate realm, there's asset management and then there's actual property management, right? And so property management is pretty messy. You're in the weeds, it's the day-to-day sort of stuff. And then asset management is kind of larger strategy based decisions that you're making around, do we want to make this capital investment or do we want to, make this bigger move over there? And so to kind of wrap it around to your point, I think it's really important and a wise business practice to regularly take those times where you step out, take off the CEO hat, take off the kind of active hat, and go into like business owner hat. And, are we moving the general direction? So again, to kind of call back to what Steve originally mentioned, having those kind of directional goals for yourself, whether it's a lifestyle goal or a monetary goal or an investment goal, maybe a certain return on money that you've invested in your business or your property, tracking those, taking the operations hat off, right? And going into business owner mode and saying, where are we going with this data? Like, what are we trying to achieve? Because tracking data just for the sake of tracking data can be, well, for someone like me who's a visionary and kind of, the CEO of my company, that I'm like, no, I don't want to do all that. But you need directional information. And so the data that you track is important, and keeping the end in mind. Where do you want to achieve payoff of your property in a certain number of years? Or is there a loan that you need to pay off? Or is there a certain lifestyle freedom that you want by hiring on some employees and having them be able to take over what you're doing with the same customer satisfaction as before, right? With a certain profitability level. So I would just say, to avoid overwhelm, it's easy with a mass of data that can be pulled from, Planning Pod or whatever system you're using, or whether it's marketing or whatever. To avoid the overwhelm, just keep kind of those one or two things in mind that you're trying to map towards and really stay focused on those.
Yeah.
So Jonathan, just to expand on that, so to take what you said and put it into a real world example, let's say you were your CEO hat now, you're ready to go, and you're looking at, let's say, putting in a robotic bar into one of your venues, just as an example. What would be your thought process? What would you look at specifically, kind of starting with what your end goal might be for that idea, and what KPIs you'd look at to evaluate whether it was even a good idea or not?
Yeah, so that's interesting. Robotic bar, just so I make sure we're talking about the same thing, like an automatic bartender sort of situation, something like that. Okay. So I would look at what's the cost that you're currently spending in payroll. What are you going to save by maybe not having to employ someone? So from a expense perspective, and then also on the flip side of that, how much is it going to cost to implement? And then in terms of, so that's just kind of very objective financial investment sort of things. But then what's the experience going to be like? So if there is something that you're going to be losing in terms of client satisfaction, because there's not going to be the same level of chat and banter that may happen from a human, unless you maybe have an advanced AI bartender or something that may come in the future, right? But maybe you're going to lose something in terms of the client satisfaction, and so analyzing that. So you'll have to really understand what is the current client satisfaction level with the existing system that you have. And I think this is a key point for a lot of business owners. You may listen to this and say, I don't have the data right now because I haven't been tracking it. Or you may have been tracking it, but you may have not been collating it, or you may not be using it to create a decision. So I would just say you might need to start finding a way to track customer satisfaction. And that can be done a lot of different ways, whether that's reviews that are connected to a little QR code that's sitting right there at the bar, whether that's surveys that you send out to folks afterwards, or you find ways to incentivize couples to send the link out to their guests just to rate their experience. There's a number of ways that you can do that, and you can get to that for your specific property. So I would just look at the client satisfaction. I would look at the investment versus what would be the long-term payoff, and then in terms of the financial section of it, like, can you generate more? Like, will you generate more if you're doing a cash bar, or if there's any sort of financial incentive around how people purchase? And again, we got to have some context around it. Is it in like an urban setting or more rural setting? There's some of those questions that go into it, but I would look at sales, I would look at the expense, and then I would look at the satisfaction of clients and guests.
And you could take a broader view on it as well. You can say, well, let's say I evaluated my business and I have nothing distinctive in my business. Maybe this is something that is worth the risk, and you evaluate, that side of the equation as well. Maybe there's something seasonal about it where you can pick up revenue where maybe there wasn't any before, depending on how risk averse people are or aren't. But kind of going through all those different columns and seeing which ones are important to you, which ones you're going to weight more heavily, based on your unique end goals for your business.
Totally.
Yeah.
And Steve, it's kind of like you could do that same logic and rationale with bringing rentals in-house, because I know a lot of venues, whether it's storage issues or whatever, just maybe even the cost of acquiring the initial rentals, there's an upfront cost of that, but then you can break it down. Is there some way that I can have upgraded rentals to differentiate myself in a number of venues in the area? It's one of the things we did here with a venue locally. There were so many venues around. It was one of the ways that we could distinguish ourselves by really having high quality venue rentals. And so we include farm tables. We have 20 farm tables, gorgeous farm tables, crossback chairs. It's all upgraded rentals, and it's all for free with the booking. And it was one of those ways we could stand out very early. So yeah, I mean, 100% just across the board, looking at this, looking at any investment like that is an awesome path.
Yeah. I want to pivot a little bit because you guys have brought up a really good topic that I think it is on the minds of a lot of venue owners and professionals, which is competitive analysis. And I'd like to dive a little deeper into that. Jonathan, can you tell us more about how you conducted the analysis that led you to realize bringing that type of rental was going to differentiate you from your competition?
Yeah, definitely. For us, I'm going to say there's two camps of folks. First, it may be people who have no experience or very, very limited experience in the events industry if you're just starting out, or, if you've been in for a while and you kind of have an understanding of the area. Where we started personally, just to kind of directly answer your question, we had a little bit of background because we had a staffing company prior, and we had ran that for 6 years. So we had been the staff that worked at the venue. So we really were familiar with venues in the area. But for someone who doesn't have that advantage, and we've had to do this in other states as we've grown our business, you need to just look at what are the current offerings, what's the current price point that you're getting, what are the inclusions that you're getting, and when you're looking at that, you create a picture. You kind of may have a frame of your geographical area, right? And we're speaking just directly to venues here. You may have a frame of your geographical area, and that you're going to pull in, maybe it's local people, maybe it's destination folks, depending on where you are in the country. Create that frame. Look, in your frame, where are people going to be coming from, and who do people have to drive by to get to your venue? And so that for us is key, because we want to know, if you have to pass 4 venues on the way up, what are those venues and where are those other stops that people may be making? And then what things do they include? And so if you see across the board, everyone's blank canvas, one, guy or gal has upgraded rentals, another one requires you to use their bar, another one has in-house catering, right? So you have a couple of different styles. Maybe you say, I can't really differentiate myself based on upgraded rentals. Having the bar in-house is, maybe I can't do that because of zoning or permitting or whatever. Maybe catering is not going to be an option for me. What are we going to do differently? How are we going to differentiate ourselves? And it might be the service. It might be we have an in-house planning team that is just incredible. They're going to be with you from start to finish, and we're going to reduce the time where you see value from the booking. So a lot of times people book, they pay that first payment, and it's like, yay, crickets. What's happening now? So maybe shortening that window of time, and immediately right after they book, delivering them a wedding plan, that's based off of a template that you customize for them, so that they can now have actionable things to do in the first 30, 60 days post booking, so they can get started on that. So it basically increases their perception of value because you delivered value right away, directly after their booking, and they didn't just get to kind of this quiet period of time. So little things like that, I would say. But I diverged from your original question. I would say looking at who is in your area, who do people have to drive by, and then just creating, and I think this is tough. This is tough for us, and this is tough for venue owners because you've got this emotional attachment. You've invested money, time, effort. You've maybe painted the gallons of paint that are on the walls. Like, you've invested here. You've got to look at the venue space. Again, take off your in the business hat and go business owner and scale back and say, what's the competitive landscape like? Why would someone book here over here? And it's not just because you exist or you think your place is better. Like, you actually have to look at it through the eyes of the customer. And you got to understand, are you dealing with Gen Z? Gen Alpha's a way off, right? We're still dealing with some millennials. We're dealing with Gen Z. What are they looking at? What are they valuing? And maybe there are things that you can do because the generations are always evolving. There are some things that you can do that are not in place that you can be a front runner on and offer to those couples. And it's going to differ in your market. If you're in Texas versus Florida versus California, like, that is going to differ. So, yeah, just being aware of your competition in a professional and friendly way, I think is really important, and adjusting it based on pricing, inclusions, and then, what can you do specifically?
You said something key in there that I just want to bring up again that's really important, probably the most important thing. When you're doing competitive analysis, you should always be doing it through the lens of the client or the customer, the person who will be experiencing, that venue or that planning process, because it's very different from your own as a business owner. Sometimes we will do competitive analysis and, everybody thinks the grass is always greener and that every other company is perfect and they're making 12 times more money than we are. And that's never the case. Everybody has the same problems, the same clientele comes in, and therefore there are the same problems. And if you switch your mindset and you start at the end and you say, I'm the customer, what is it I'm looking for? Like you said, Jonathan, based on my region or something specific, what is that venue offering to me as a customer versus what I can offer? You get something, it's called a commodity business, which is, payment processing, right? Well, I have no loyalty to the company. I want 3.1% instead of 3.2%, and I'll switch because it's a commodity. I can get it anywhere. And viewing your business like that is actually a really good, safe thing to do because it's always pushing you to be more unique, to find out where you can differentiate yourself and offer, that perceived value like you were talking about. But really, just everything should be done on the competitive side through the lens of the customer, the person you're serving. Really key.
Well, and then anything that you do offer to try and differentiate, then of course it makes perfect sense to then collect feedback and understand how people are really responding to it. So the data goes further than implementing the differentiator. It also goes into finding out the success of it, which I think is something that a lot of people sometimes forget about. It's one thing to just have a feel for how your clients might feel about a change that you made. It's another to have quantifiable data with them telling you exactly what they think so that you know how worthwhile that change was.
That's huge. So I have a couple of things that I want to mention on that. So first, Hannah, just a very practical application of that. Every time we start working with a new venue or any chance I get to talk to a new venue, I say at the very, very base, your goal is to get tours. Just get the tours. Obviously, you want to get the leads in first, but you want to get tours because a real couple who is walking your grounds or who's experiencing a consultation with your business, you have that opportunity to ask them and get the data. And do yourself a favor, write the data down. Write the data down as they said it, not as they heard it, and not as you heard it. And that's something, I heard that they wanted this. Well, maybe they said they wanted this, but what was most important was this other thing. So just getting that initial feedback is huge because it will allow you to pivot, and not pivoting based on the comments of one or two people, but allow yourself to get some data, get 20 or 30 tours in there. And that's going to be important feedback. But Steve, I want to mention something. I think there's two things. I think there's tangible differentiators and tangible things that you can do. Maybe we have a gazebo, or we have we just painted our barn and it's a little bit more modern than others in the area, or whatever. Those are very tangible things. But then there's intangible things. And we're dealing right now with an economy and a market that is absolutely insane. I mean, it's our client level is staying more or less the same, maybe some years slightly declining in terms of the amount of people who are getting married, but the amount of venues that are opening up is greater than ever before. And so this really calls out something important, like how are we going to stand out? You can't just build it and expect people to come anymore, because to my point earlier, they're going to have to drive through 9 places where they previously were driving through one or by one. And so to differentiate yourself, the intangible side of this, I think, is going to be personal branding on the part of the business owner, on a part of the team there, because people connect with people, people buy from people, and people love to buy, but they don't love to be sold. And so if you can create a intangible differentiator by the way that you show up or your team shows up on social media or on your marketing, and you're maybe quirky, that's your style. Guess what? There are tons of quirky couples that are out there that are going to be attracted to your business because they see something that they like about your style that they'll resonate with, and they're going to book with you because even though the property, you and the property next to you are fairly similar or comparable in terms of pricing and some of the inclusions, the tangibles, you've got that intangible going for you. And so I think for 2024, 2025, and really beyond, venue owners are going to need to dig in a little bit on the personal branding side, on telling the story of what they're doing. And that can give folks an edge in a very congested market.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of folks might be surprised at the success reflected in their data from an intangible differentiator like that. That makes a lot of sense. I want to pivot slightly and talk about something a little bit more objective in terms of data, and that is using your existing and historical business data to maximize your slow seasons. Or I'm sorry, not maximize your slow seasons. We don't want them to be slower. Mitigate your slow seasons and maximize your peak seasons. How can you use the data at hand to help you make strategic, objective moves that are going to help you grow? And Steve, I'm actually curious to hear from you about this one first.
Okay. I'll look at this from my perspective. I would start with analyzing what we've done well. If I owned a venue, I would say, okay, I was busy in this month or this season. Why? Did it actually have anything to do with that season? Was there outside factors I wasn't aware of? Maybe it was tax season and everybody got refund checks, and so therefore they were spending money. Was I busy because my venue was indoor and heated and it was 3 degrees outside? I would look at all those factors that were unique to me, and then I would see, well, what's missing in my slow seasons, or even just my slow times. And are there any things from my successful times that I'd be able to replicate into that? Is my payroll lower and therefore I can pivot in my slower times and have smaller events than I might normally have? Are there things specific to that time of year that I could get into and diversify? Are there other audiences that I might not be able to serve that I could serve during those times? Maybe it's, spring break and nobody's around. Maybe I could do corporate events during that week. Those kinds of things. I tend to look at everything, very objectively, but also pivoting in small increments. I think that's really important too, when you look at your data. If there were 30 things I could look at, unique to my business, what was my ROI, what was my satisfaction, all those things we've already talked about. I would look at them one at a time and objectively evaluate, are they transferable to my slow times? If not, why or why not? And then I would take the next step and say, well, what can I do to fill that in with all the other tools at my disposal? which can be applied to any business really, but that's the way I would think about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that knowing who you're attracting in any given season, knowing what customer they are, knowing who you might be able to appeal to in the winter versus the summer is incredibly useful. Jonathan, what's your take on that?
So I have two ways of approaching this. First, I think understanding how to mitigate your slow season is as much a conversation about maximizing your high season as it is mitigating your slow season, because just in our experience, we've found it's easier to increase if we're looking at this clear or plainly from a cost perspective. It's easier to increase your peak days through maybe dynamic pricing or just an understanding of what are your most popular months, and increasing the cost of those months versus trying to increase the cost in poor months. And I'm taking this directly from experience. It's so much harder for us to raise the price of a Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday event, a midweek event. It's harder for us to raise that pricing versus us raising a Friday, Saturday, or Sunday pricing. So if you are looking at a year altogether, understanding what months can you really maximize to maybe help mitigate those slow season. So that's number one. Number two is how do we maximize the slow season times we have? And to Steve's point, what else can you do? And I think the slow season is a wonderful opportunity to give back to the community. And by doing that, you can call it whatever you want, looking at it from a very business sense. It's marketing dollars that you're spending. And so if you can just get cost for what it takes to keep your business open, but you're hosting local events, local clubs, Chamber of Commerce meetups, local, a variety of different things. And your space will lend itself to different groups of people that are hosting their event. People are constantly looking for event space. They may not be looking for event space at $5,000 or $7,000 or $10,000 a rental, and they may not be looking for a full day rental, but they may be looking at it for a luncheon. There may be, you may be looking at it. People may be looking at it for other things. And so I would say during those slow times, being willing to be flexible and adjust the types of events that you do are key. And then another part about mitigating the slow season is providing incentives. And if you know that you have a defined off season, and you also know that maybe you don't have that heating, that you were talking about, Steve, in your area, and some of those months right on the cusp of winter are not going to be as valuable. I don't like using the word discount, so incentivize clients to come in and use the space at a reduced price. And you'll have a lot of folks out there that are looking to save money. They still want to get married at a beautiful spot. They might reduce their guest count and they're going to get married. One of my best friends, very well off, does financial advising and different things. He wanted to save his money and buy a second investment property. So he did a brunch wedding and it was shorter. And he had, I think, 60 people, cut the guest count a little bit, but he did a brunch wedding. And it was, during a time that normally that facility wouldn't have been booked, but they found a way to get a couple of $1,000s out of that time period. And so I think, again, being flexible and being willing to evaluate, how can you flex and pivot and do different types of things and think outside the box. Slow season is a great time for that.
Oh, a brunch wedding is like my dream. You just answered it, like when it comes time for me, that's what's happening. I'm like, I like a brunch, I like a short social gathering, and then I like to enjoy the rest of my day. That sounds great. I love it.
The other thing I could add to that too, Jonathan, I think you keep talking around this topic a little bit. I want to bring it up, is the marketing aspect of, smoothing out your year. When you were talking about relationship marketing before, which is you're not actively selling to somebody, you're just building relationships. You're building, the top of your funnel, so that people know who you are. And they're not necessarily looking right now, but when they are, they'll come to you. And a great way to smooth out your year to ensure that, if you have the correct offerings, that you will have those leads coming in on a consistent basis, is to really measure your marketing. And you can have things that you can directly attribute to revenue. You know, if you put out an ad and somebody answers that ad and you book, great. But there's also this branding and relationship aspect to it, which is host, put on events, just let people know who you are. You know, you might not be able to measure it objectively with data, but in 6 months, that person might come back because they remember who you are. You know, and that's important to keep in mind too.
Absolutely. I kind of want to mention something that may is kind of just interesting. And I was looking at data around dating and around engagements and things like that. And this is all pre-wedding, pre-engagement sort of things, right? One of the number one, and I can't remember, I need to now find this study so I can reference it repeatedly, because I think it just came up as you were saying that. There was a corollary drawn between what was the source of the introduction of people who got married. And one of the top ways that people who got married were introduced to their partner was not necessarily through an app or, you know, going to a bar or whatever. It was an introduction from a mutual friend.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we think less about going up to the guy or gal at the bar, or us being business owners going to couples, right? I'm drawing that parallel. Instead of having it be so direct, using that off-season time to develop relationships with friends and develop relationships with influential people in these couples' lives. This could be grandma. This could be mom, dad, aunt, uncle. This could be other influential people who are going to have a say in the process of search. And if you are on the top of mind because your mom just went to a ladies who lunch event at your venue, and her daughter just, you know, fiance just became a fiance, pop the question, whatever it may be. Now all of a sudden, hey, I was just at this place, they do weddings. That's going to be the first stop on the list. So 100%.
Yeah. Well, and I would argue that even though that is less quantifiable than other data you could track, you could still quantify that. You know, if people are coming in through a contact form, at the first meeting that you have with them, you can either embed this on the form or ask them personally, like, you know, I'm interested, what drew you to us? And they're going to tell you, well, my mom came to your venue and she loved it and showed me pictures and I loved it. And so you can quantify that return. And I agree with both of you. I think there's a lot to be said for an investment in those relationships and investment in a community. In some cases, overriding the return for just paid advertising. So yeah,
Hannah, can I go tactical, really tactical on that for like 30 seconds?
of course, do it.
So in the lead form, wherever you're pulling your lead data from, I would really encourage folks to not just count on whatever your dropdown says, but to go verify it in conversations through text, email, call, as well as when you meet the couple in person, because last click attribution is a real thing in our industry. And it might be they saw you on, you know, an online platform, and then they went over here and then they saw you on Instagram, and then their mom said, hey, I just was at that spot, right? So really understanding the client journey, and you're going to get that. And that's a low commitment question that you can ask early on in the process to get the dialogue going. So when you're on that tour, don't just say, oh, great, I saw you, you know, says here you saw us on Google. Yeah, 100% you're on Google. You were found on the internet, probably, right? But where actually, like, what happened first, second, and third? Like, was it, you know, were you on some of those online platforms? Was it your mom? Was it because of a social event? And then go back in the notes on the CRM and write that in, because you, even if it's just you, you're doing the tours and you're the owner, and you're gonna have a hard time remembering 6 months, 2 years from now where all of your leads are coming from, and you're gonna want to look on the look at the return that you have. So anyway, that's my little soapbox on that. Do your future self a favor and take notes and really drill into where people are finding you.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Well, before we head into kind of the last area I'd like to pivot into, I want to remind everyone who's attending live, we will have some short time at the end of this session for a Q&A. So if you've got questions that you've been holding on to, feel free to type them into the chat or the Q&A whenever. And when we get to that open question answer section, then we'll get to your question. So the next thing I want to talk about here is The latest in technology or systems to help event and venue businesses not only track their data, but make that directional sense of it that we've been talking about so that they can make both objective and subjective business decisions that are going to drive them forward. And Steve, I would love to start with you on this one because you've been so active in the development of reporting within our product. Can you talk a little bit about what we're able to bring to people through that?
Yeah, I think the one key thing with reporting beyond anything else is customizability. I think the theme through all of this has been you have to define what's important to you and then measure that. There is no one size fits all. And so being able to kind of take these atomic pieces of data and mix and match them in different ways that suit you, to give you kind of that insight that you need, regardless of what platform or tool you use, Excel, it doesn't even matter. It's being able to get that granularity so that you can actually see what you want to see. Some people like seeing data in a spreadsheet form with rows and text and numbers. Some people like seeing graphs and getting the 30,000-foot overview. So it's just a matter of finding the tools that you like and making sure they're flexible enough to give you what you actually need.
Mhm. Yeah, I think customizability is huge. Jonathan, I know you and I talked about the importance of visualizing trends through data. And I think that's the best way to avoid overwhelm. Figure out what type of learner that you are, and cater to that, or what type of learner your stakeholders are. What do people respond to? We have two founders here at Planning Pod. We have Steve, who's here with us, and then we have Jeff. They both think differently, and it's worth knowing how to present both of them data that we can all make sense of. And Jonathan, I know that you've got several different tools that you have used before. Can you talk a little bit about what you use now or what you might recommend that venues look into for reporting and analytics?
Yeah, definitely. And before I jump into that though, Steve, I think what you said about flexibility is so important because you've got to be able to take data and compare it against other data. And if the only way that your CRM or software is spitting data back out is inflexible and it just shows you 3 reports, or it doesn't allow you to extract the data individually and kind of compare it against expenses or compare it against other pieces of your business that are contextual to kind of the full-on picture as a business owner, you're going to end up in a world of hurt down the line. You're going to end up confused and wondering where. And so yeah, flexibility in data, being able to pull that out, download into the CSV, and create your own Excel if you needed to. It'll help you with funding. It'll help you with making strategic decisions down the line, a number of things. For us, we currently use both Honeybook and Planning Pod. We use a variety of different softwares because I firmly believe there's not a one size fits all when it comes to like a CRM platform. Planning Pod we found is much more robust in terms of how it enables us. Like we're using it on a venue that is multifaceted and where we need a lot of the data, where we need a lot of the customizability and the flexibility. So Planning Pod is fantastic. I would say other things in terms of the stack of tech that we use, there's project management tools like Asana. We've used Trello, Basecamp, ClickUp, Monday.com. We've used just about all of them. Vrike. I would also say just a quick tactical point on that. Don't pay for the full year until you try it. I've got burned a couple of times because I love a good discount. They'll give you the discount if you sign up for the year. And so I'm like, yeah, get that. And then I've just paid for a year and find out the team doesn't like it after 2 or 3 months. So, use the free trial, get in and do that. But in terms of that, project management softwares are so helpful. Create a system and stick to the system and force yourself as the founder to stick with the system, which is very difficult. I am speaking from personal experience. I want to talk about a couple of AI tools that have been helpful for us. And I think AI is kind of on the tip of everyone's tongue. there's something called Cast Magic, and we found it castmagic.io, and we found it fairly early on, but we used it in the podcast application. But there's a lot of applications for venue owners as well. It's basically something where you can speak into the phone. And I know a lot of us, it's easier to speak than it is to, go crazy with our thumbs. And so you can speak into this, and not only will it transcribe what you said, but then it will also create a number of things. It can create Instagram captions from it. It can create blog inspo and ideas. It can create, there's not much it can't create, but it's very socially and market focused in the types of content that it'll spit out. And so if you are that person who can talk a lot quicker than you can type, or you have something that you need to create a number of different pieces of information from, and maybe you have a small little section using, and I'm sure Cast Magic isn't alone, it's just the one that's used for us, but AI tools that help you exponentialize the effort that you're putting in. AI allows us to do that. You've got to put good quality in. Don't just like say, hey, I'm a wedding venue, write me 12 good captions, right? Like put some intentionality into that. Yeah, in terms of software, gosh, what else do we use? It's awesome that you guys have a planning or like a seating layout inside Planning Pod. I would say that's another one that's really important, kind of a layout and design tool. And so, yeah, that's on the event management side and the CRM side. Any sort of marketing or automation platforms like Planoly, you can use Tailwind. There's so many of those, but I would say that is another layer that allows you to work on your business, not in your business all the time, because if you've scheduled your posts for the week, now you don't have to spend time every single day going through back through the same thing, and you can take a day completely free of some of those in the weeds things. So yeah, those are a couple of tools that have been helpful for us.
Yeah, I'm curious, since you kind of dipped your toe in with the AI application stuff. And Steve, I know that you have been living a little bit in the world of AI when it comes to how we can bring that into the power behind our software that we can provide to event venue businesses. What do you envision in terms of the direction of AI when it comes to reporting and analytics, Steve?
Yeah. At some point in time, it will be very powerful. Right now, if you're attempting to get some meaningful patterns or information out of reporting, out of big data, AI is good because it can crunch numbers, at a large scale. At the scale that we're talking about here, AI, it will be good at just crunching objective numbers, things that it can't get wrong, let's say. Anything that requires verification, where if you're not the expert and you don't know if AI is actually telling you something that's accurate or not, you need to stay away from it. And so you have to be very careful about dipping your toe into using AI. So in the context of what Jonathan was talking about, it's perfect because it's perfect for, repeating routine tasks, taking load off your plate. Jonathan doesn't need to be an expert in developing, an Instagram reel in order to have this tool do it for him, right? But even he probably is, and he'll know it's being done correctly. You don't want to use AI in your reporting to have it spit something out at you and you take it as gospel. And then you move on from there, and you make assumptions based on what it's told you. So to kind of bring it back to reporting, let's say in competitive research, you could go to ChatGPT and ask it, what's the average budget for a wedding in December in Toledo, Ohio? And it will spit back a number. And you could make business decisions based on that number. Oh my gosh, we charge too much. Oh my gosh, we charge too little. You can't do that yet because you have no idea if that information is accurate. It's only as good as the sources that it's using, and it abstracts away the sources that it's using unless you ask for them. Using data that's 10 years old. You just don't know. And so Use it for things that make your life easier. Don't use it as an expert upon which you base decisions.
It's a
Yeah.
tool first and foremost, for sure.
Yeah.
And Jonathan, I'm going to let you expand because I know you want to. But in a moment, we're going to turn to a couple of questions that we've gotten through our Q&A. Go for it, Jonathan.
I'll go very fast. I would just say increasing your personal output in terms of unit per hour because of the information that you know, not the information you're learning from it. And I think, Steve, that's kind of the point that you're making. We use AI currently as an amplifier, not an educational source. And so you can if you ask it from a legal perspective, hey, write me, I need some clauses that are going to need to be included in my contract. And you're not a lawyer and you don't know. Now, if you know you need a arbitration clause that contains X, Y, and Z because you are a lawyer and you don't want to type it all out and you don't have any boilerplate stuff, great. You do that. Now you're able, because you know what it looks like and you can actually do the work. That's a different scenario. So I would say, yeah, use it as an amplifier, not an educational source.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Completely.
Awesome. Well, we touched on a lot today, covered a lot of ground. There's so much to talk about when it comes to business data in any business, let alone just events and venues. And I'm excited to address a couple questions here. The first one I have is from Janet. Hi, Janet. And the first question is, Steve, is your background real? The sleeping puppy in the back is so cute. We know it's real.
No, that's Lucy. Passed out.
Lucy is adorable. We love her. And the second question from Janet is, what's the most unexpected data that you've gathered that has caused a surprising big impact on your sales? I'll let you both answer this, but Steve, I'm curious about your take here.
The easiest one to talk about is post-COVID. There was a giant explosion of events as people were getting back to in person. And it actually helped to ramp all the businesses that were prepared for it. And we were not expecting that. During COVID, this entire industry got decimated. And everybody was trying to come up with, ways to keep revenue, to keep people employed. And then all of a sudden it was like Christmas every day for about a year, and that's obviously come back down. And now that's what everybody is struggling with. Like Jonathan was saying, everybody decided this was a great industry to be in, and everybody and their mother was buying a venue, most of which are going out of business at this point. But for me, that's the biggest one. A little bit of an aside to that too is when we're looking at KPIs, we don't look too far into the future when we're analyzing things, because all these KPIs are just points in time. They're just snapshots, and things can change tomorrow, next week, a week beyond that. So when we're dealing with what we're going to do in the future, we generally don't look realistically more than 6 months into the future.
Yeah. How about you, Jonathan?
Yeah, COVID, I mean, that's a great perspective to come from. For us, it's tricky to say. I think one of the biggest things for us was rebounding from COVID, but also at that point in time, we were really focusing our efforts because we started venue management in 2018, and then we really ramped it up in 2020. Steve, to your point, I have talked to so many people who bought a business in 2022 based on 2021 numbers. And then everyone knew that 2020 was a bad year. So it was like, look what this property did in 2021 and what we have on the books for 22. And now we're in 23, 24. It's like, this is a completely different scenario. And so, yeah, we do the same exact thing. We're looking 3 months out, 6 months out. We're taking it quarter by quarter to try to understand that snapshot. For us as well, we've been doing. It's been a weird that answering that question. I'm hesitating a little bit on it because our growth has been across the country. It's not necessarily been deeper in a market, although that has been happening. So we've been in the San Diego market for a long time. We've been in Connecticut for about a month now. We've been in the Georgia market for like a year and a half. You know, we're getting into the Tennessee and Alabama market right now. So we're kind of experiencing different markets. And so growth for us has been, you know, understanding what the market in San Diego needs, but kind of as a macro and as a whole, what's happening in the industry, what's happening in the wedding and events industry. And so I think understanding for us that you can't count on bookings, you know, ahead necessarily. You need to find ways to diversify, be flexible, and create a very nimble operations plan that, you know, doesn't lock you into 4 or 5 full-time people. What's your seasonality like? Like just really, really counting the cents, and then the dollars, you know, will end up adding up, but just really being very, very, very serious and sober-minded about operational costs. I would say, especially for venue owners, because it's such a big financial commitment.
Absolutely. I want to check in with you both because we're just about at the end. Do you both have another moment or two to answer one more question?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We've got one more from an anonymous attendee. And this question, we could go in a lot of directions. So just give us your hot take on it. How would you recommend addressing the challenge of managing a venue located in a less desirable area, such as near a homeless encampment? Jonathan, what do you think about that?
Oh man, I have an interesting one. This comes from real estate though.
Okay.
Find ways to serve law enforcement for free.
Okay.
This is a thing that came from a real estate developer. They were in a really, really tough area. There was a lot of crime, and they actually had an event space as part of it was a community that they were building. They wanted to kind of help bring up the area and the perspective of safety in the area. And so they started serving police officers donuts, free donuts and coffee and things like that. And that became like almost a second hub for where there was a lot of police traffic, and very slowly that area kind of started to grow out of that. And there was a positive association that came, and they were able to start attracting events, and it didn't necessarily fix that problem, but it kind of helped create a environment where it seemed like it was a very safe or kind of at least regulated environment. So that might be a little bit of an offbeat one for folks, but just came to mind initially when you said that. I will go in a different direction, specifically event focused, which is we have a current property that is in an area that is really difficult in terms of this, and the city's putting a lot of work into this area, but it has had a reputation in the past of being somewhere that you want to avoid. And our venue, it's along this road, all the area around it you want to avoid, and then you turn in and it's like, wow, this is amazing. And so I would just say creating a online experience for folks that really accentuates the offerings that you have and the experience that folks are going to have. And it almost is like when you look around on the approach, you're like, wait, where are we going? Are we in the right location? And then you go in and all of a sudden, incredible hospitality, beautiful environment, some of those things. So the contrast could actually be helpful to you. But yeah, I mean, I think there's so many factors that go into answering this question, but I would say, yeah, those things like just doubling down on your service, the appearance of your spot, and then creating an online experience for folks that will really get them to come and not be distracted or dissuaded on their drive in, and or finding a way to kind of support local law enforcement, fire, other local facilities that kind of help encourage the area. And it depends on your property as well. I mean, there's a lot of factors. We'd have to kind of get some more specifics, but yeah.
Awesome. Steve, do you have a take on managing a venue in a less desirable area?
Yeah, I mean, it's along the lines of what Jonathan said. I would make the location, the physical location, if I were this business owner, irrelevant. I would say, I don't care where my venue is. and I would figure out a way to make it a destination, which is kind of what Jonathan said, through unique offerings, unique experiences, things that people can't get anywhere else. And it takes the location out of the equation. And just, you don't apologize for where it is. You just make it a non-issue. And there's all sorts of examples like that. I mean, there's a restaurant in Denver called Casa Bonita, which is a destination, and it is in the middle of this horrible area. But they have cliff diving inside, and it's horrible food, and it doesn't matter because everybody goes and they watch the cliff diving.
It's an icon. Love Casa Bonita.
Love it, right? You go.
Yeah.
Legoland is built in the middle of an office park in California. You drive in and it looks like you're going to visit your accountant. And then all of a sudden you park and you're in Legoland. Its physical location means nothing. It's all about the experience when you're there. So that's what I would concentrate on, whatever that meant.
Absolutely.
That's great feedback. That's great advice.
Awesome. Well, you guys, we're officially over our time. This has been such a great conversation. Thank you both for joining me. I've learned a lot. We had a couple questions come in that we don't have time for from Lisa Vitello. Lisa, if you're still on here, I'm going to email you and address your questions so that you get an answer from us. So keep an eye out for that. We will get to you. But thanks to everyone for joining. Thanks to you both. And we want to hear from you, the people who are here attending. If you want us to expand on a certain topic, if you have more in-depth questions about some things that we touched on, whether it's focused on reporting or not, we want to hear from you. So reach out to us at support@planningpod.com if you do have those questions. We'd be more than happy to answer them and give you our insight. Make sure that you go follow both of us on social. Jonathan's podcast, The Venue RX, is a great presence on social as well as Weeva. And make sure you give that a listen. And Planning Pod is active on all social channels as well. So thank you all so much. We hope that you enjoyed this, and we look forward to seeing you again for our next webinar.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you guys. See you later.